Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. Please subscribe now to get the latest ancient history news and independent research from around the world. The red ochre graffiti in the relieving chambers of the Great Pyramid is the main piece of evidence used by Egyptologists to date the structure to the 4th dynasty and the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. Yes, we know there has been radiocarbon dating on mortar found between the pyramid blocks, we know there is the Diary of Mira, and we also have the writings of Herodotus. But the Khufu graffiti that was discovered by Howard Vyse in the 19th century is a critical piece of evidence that associates Khufu with the Great Pyramid. Many alternative history websites and YouTube channels will tell you that this is a forgery, that it was painted by Howard Vyse himself so he could claim some major discovery and grab the headlines. In some circles, this is almost taken as an accepted fact, but in my opinion, the burden of proof is on those making these forgery claims. If the graffiti said, built by Atlas, King of Atlantis, many in the alternative community would defend this piece of evidence at all costs. And don't get me wrong, I would love it if such a thing did exist, but I do hope I would be as objective and critical of this as I am about the Khufu graffiti. I used to have an alternative narrative in my head, totally influenced by the work of others, and I would look for further evidence to prove the narrative. I would also look to pick holes in anything that brought my narrative down, but that is totally the wrong way to tackle the subject of the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx and the Giza Plateau. With regards to interpretation, what I've been doing in recent months, and what I'll be doing going forward, is not taking anyone's word as fact, whether an Egyptologist, scientist or alternative researcher, because I want to evaluate the evidence for myself, and interpret it in the most logical way I can. Being a voice in the alternative community, once felt I had a duty to oppose conventional archaeology, to continue to push forward the Giza power plant theory, even though we can't seem to find anything it powered, to assume the Anunnaki were real sky gods who enslaved humanity, when such a thing has no supporting evidence. To say that every single pyramid is a pre-flood relic of a lost ancient civilization, when actually they were built by different civilizations with different methods in different periods of time. And finally, to accept the Sphinx is thousands of years older than we are told, when in fact there are other independent geologists who disagree. I've noticed that every time I quote a radiocarbon date as evidence against an alternative viewpoint, I receive countless comments telling me that radiocarbon dating is unreliable and a complete load of rubbish, and to simply take it with a pinch of salt. Yet when I say that Göbekli Tepe was built between the 10th and 8th millenniums BC, as shown by radiocarbon dating, nobody leaves a comment that these dates are unreliable and a load of rubbish. There seems to be a selective acceptance for radiocarbon dating. If you think it is unreliable and rubbish, fair enough, but you surely can't trust it for Göbekli Tepe either. Without the radiocarbon dating, can you prove to me that Göbekli Tepe isn't just, 4,000 years old? Therefore we have to have some confidence in the science, and if not, we have to discount it entirely. Some people say that the pyramids and the Giza Plateau are covered in seashells and marine organisms, proving that a deluge washed over the area, but this is simply untrue. Yes, there are lots and lots of fragmented shells on the pyramids and in the Giza sand, but this is simply because the rocks at Giza are primarily fossiliferous limestone. The sand is simply made from this limestone. Therefore, tiny fossil shells eroded from the limestone do cover the Giza Plateau and also the Sahara Desert, but no way do they indicate that seawater covered the pyramids. Some also say that these shells have been radiocarbon dated to the time of the so-called Great Flood, yet the same people are never able to provide a source. Such a test has never taken place. They are in fact 55 to 35 million years old. But some people still like to say that the Giza pyramids are around 10,000 years old, and if somebody counters this and says the original pyramid casing stones of the Khafre pyramid do not show 10,000 years of weathering, it is quickly countered by people saying that the pyramids were probably reclad in dynastic times. And this is my point. People are quick to defend their ideas and beliefs and to come up with a narrative that fits any evidence to the contrary. If the pyramid casing stones do not show 10,000 years of weathering, it probably means the pyramid is not 10,000 years old. That's the logical conclusion. If you want to believe the Giza pyramids are 10,000 years old, then you really need to present some evidence. Yes, they may well be, and the evidence is yet to be discovered, but until the time comes, we have to work with the evidence we have. There is a common belief that the dynastic Egyptians could not build the Great Pyramid, so therefore it must be far older. And yes, it's a nice assumption, and one that I would be willing to accept and get behind, but please tell me, why is this logical? Wouldn't it be more logical to assume that the Sate kings, the Romans or Greeks, built the Great Pyramid? That it is far younger and not older than the 4th dynasty? Built by a more evolved and advanced society that had iron tools and arguably a deeper understanding of mathematics and science. But no, I don't think the pyramids are this young, but hopefully you see my point. If you don't think the dynastic Egyptians could build the pyramids, why do we assume that they date to thousands of years before? Egypt's Nabda Playa is dated to around 7500 BC, and the simple ring of stones, although showing astronomical alignments, are so far removed from the Great Pyramid that you can't even compare the two. What other structure in pre-dynastic times can we use to prove that the Great Pyramid is likely to be from this period? What tools and technologies have been found that we could put together and use as evidence? I can get behind any idea if there is compelling evidence, but I won't jump on the alternative bandwagon without questioning the idea first. I feel I have a duty to be accurate and impartial, and to present facts and evidence, and make interpretations based on this evidence. It's one of the reasons I don't discuss ancient aliens, as I'm yet to see any compelling proof. And this brings me nicely to the famous Khufu Graffiti. As stated, Howard Vyse discovered graffiti in the relieving chambers of the Great Pyramid, all made with red ochre paint. We are told that these are the work of the gangs of stonecutters and pyramid builders of Khufu. The huge blocks of granite contain variants of the pharaoh's name, such as Khufu, Khnum-Khuf and Medjiddu, the first two being found inside a royal cartouche, whilst the latter is the Horus name. The 4 relieving chambers opened by Howard Vyse all contained graffiti, yet the Khufu name was concentrated in just 2. One reason that many suspect a fraud is because the previously opened Davison's chamber contained no quarry marks at all, only the ones opened by Vyse, which does seem somewhat convenient. The most famous instance of graffiti written in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs reads, "The Gang, Companions of Khufu," writing that was copied down by Mr. J.R. Hill, who was the assistant of Howard Vyse. It was sent to Samuel Birch at the British Museum, who identified the cartouche as belonging to Khufu, aka Cheops or Sufis. This confirmed that Pharaoh Khufu did build the Great Pyramid, therefore proving the Greek historian Herodotus correct, a man who first made the claim hundreds of years earlier. So, it seems like a straightforward story, a good piece of historical evidence, so why do so many people doubt it? Is it simply because we don't want to accept an Egyptological timeline of history? People don't seem to want to trust Howard Vyse, and the motive often put forward is that he had spent so much time in Egypt and had nothing to show for his work. He therefore needed to find something big, to stamp his name into the history books. But this is a baseless assumption. We don't know a great deal about Howard Vyse the man, or his ambitions, but if he was a devious character who wanted to pull off an almighty hoax, why didn't he use his money and resources to do a better job? He could have acquired any number of Egyptian artefacts from the countless excavations he was doing at the time and planted them inside the Great Pyramid. When he excavated beneath the floor of the king's chamber, he could have had Khufu's name engraved into the stone, or said, I don't know, that he found a statue of Osiris in the sand-filled cavities around the queen's chamber. The fact is, he could have done anything and gotten away with it. He could have flipped over the king's chamber sarcophagus and have a stonemason write Khufu's name onto it. He was a rich and powerful man, commanding a team of poor workers. He could have done a far better forgery if he really wanted to. Before the 19th century, nobody had ever gone into as much detail about the Great Pyramid as Howard Vyse, and he also made a number of new discoveries. He had free reign of the pyramid and could have set up a truly incredible find if he really wanted to, and that would have truly cemented his name in the history books. But as a mark of his character, we do know that Vyse signed over the ownership of his finds to the ruler of Egypt, and anything he was allowed to keep, he donated to the British Museum. And yes, we have the records. It really doesn't sound like the behaviour of a charlatan who could have made substantial money on the black market. The reason why he would do it was the first thing that came into my mind, but there is also another problem with the forgery hypothesis. Khufu's Horus name was Medjiddu, and this wasn't known about when Vyse was in Egypt. So how did he forge this name, as well as Khufu and Khnum-Kuf inside the Great Pyramid? It's an impossible forgery, and therefore it's impossible. Fans of Graham Hancock will know how he once supported the forgery hypothesis in his famous book Fingerprints of the Gods, but he has since changed his mind on the validity of the claims. Before he published his book, he was unable to gain access to the upper compartments of the Great Pyramid, but Zahi Hawass did allow him to spend an entire day inside the chambers back in December 1997. As Hancock says, there were no restrictions on where he could go, and he had the whole day to examine the hieroglyphs under powerful lights. He notes that cracks in some of the joints between the stones were small yet wide enough to see inside, and Hancock noted how the red ochre hieroglyphs were also set far back into the masonry. In Hancock's own words, no forger could have reached in there after the blocks had already been set in place. Blocks that weigh tens of tons each, are immovable and interlinked with one another. Hancock continues, the only reasonable conclusion is the one which Orthodox Egyptologists have already long held, namely that the hieroglyphs are genuine Old Kingdom graffiti and that they were daubed on the block before construction began. Hancock offers supporting evidence that the star shafts and passageways of the Great Pyramid point to specific stars as they would have appeared in the night sky during the 4th dynasty, something which I'm not entirely in agreement with because of what Rudolf Gantenbrink said, and Mano explored them in great detail and explained that the shafts are far from straight and actually bend a great deal, therefore making them unlikely to be aligned with astronomical objects. Hancock believes that Khufu did build the Great Pyramid, or at least most of it, although admits that the subterranean chamber could be earlier. Saying that, he doesn't believe that the pyramid was built to be a tomb for the pharaoh, and even the Greek Herodotus also says that Khufu was not laid to rest inside the pyramid. John Anthony West also saw the graffiti in the relieving chambers, and independently came to the same conclusion as Hancock regarding their age and authenticity. Access into the relieving chambers is severely restricted, and unless we can actually go inside and view them firsthand, calling them a hoax is unfair and unfounded. As we've heard on the Joe Rogan podcast, and seen from the live debate that never happened, there is no love lost between Graham Hancock and Zahi Hawass. Hancock and West could have come away from the pyramid and said that the graffiti hoax claim was inconclusive, but they didn't. They say that the pyramid must have been built during the 4th dynasty, and Robert Bauval also agrees, and he and Zahi Hawass also have a somewhat colourful history. Bauval says that he wished the graffiti was a hoax because it would make for a dramatic theory, but the truth is it is real and authentic, and Bauval is no stranger to shaking things up in the Egyptological world. He certainly isn't afraid to go against the grain, as his book The Orion Mystery showed. He explains that something like mortar was between two relieving chamber blocks, and when removed, graffiti could be seen inside the joint. He is adamant there is no way it could have been faked. So, it's one thing to say that Egyptologists have an agenda when saying that Khufu built the pyramids, but what would be Hancock, West and Bauval's reasoning? It surely would have been far easier for Hancock to say it was inconclusive, and therefore not having to release a statement on the matter, because then his previous work, Fingerprints of the Gods, would not contain inaccuracies. He actually chose the harder option. For Howard Vyse, it was a somewhat convenient discovery, but it's not too incredible to be true. Back to Khufu, and people say that he didn't build the pyramid because he didn't leave any inscriptions inside. Well, there are actually no inscriptions inside more than 20 Egyptian pyramids. Therefore it isn't unusual, and maybe it was good practice not to carve the walls of a pyramid. And remember, we don't know the true function of the pyramids. Maybe once upon a time there were many objects inside the Great Pyramid, each inscribed with Khufu's name. We simply don't know. But just because there are no hieroglyphs inside the Great Pyramid doesn't mean there should be. But people say that Khufu's name has been misspelt in places because Vyse was using a specific sourcebook to learn how to write the correct hieroglyphs, a book that contained the same error. But no, Khufu's name hasn't been misspelt inside the pyramid, and this is an often repeated misunderstanding, and if you look at John Gardner Wilkinson's Materia Hieroglyphica, you'll understand what I mean. Contrary to popular belief, the red ochre paint of the Khufu cartouche hasn't been radiocarbon dated by the two people who illegally entered the relieving chambers a few years ago. But if it was and the date came back to the 4th dynasty, some people still wouldn't accept the radiocarbon dating method. But would they accept it if the dating came through as 19th century? As stated at the start of this video, we need to be objective and critical when looking at ancient history. And if we can't accept the official interpretation, which sometimes is based on very minimal evidence, then to counter it, we do need to present evidence, because the burden of proof is on us. It was on Graham Hancock after Fingerprints of the Gods, and when he was finally given access to the Great Pyramid to look at the graffiti firsthand, he had to admit it was authentic. And no pyramid before or after the Great Pyramid can compete with the quality or craftsmanship, but maybe this is because Khufu was the only pharaoh to have the time, money, power and inclination to make the structure a reality. The fact is, times change. Different rulers have different goals and ambitions. Khufu's primary ambition may have been to build the greatest structure the world would ever see, the Great Pyramid. And if historical accounts are true, he went as far as being a despot to the people to make his dream a reality. Maybe no other pharaoh wanted the legacy that Khufu left behind him, so they never undertook a building project on that scale for that reason. We just don't know the mindset of the Old Kingdom Egyptians. We don't fully understand social, economic and political changes and struggles that took place from pharaoh to pharaoh, and therefore we can only speculate. By all accounts, the Great Pyramid does bear Khufu's name, and no, it isn't a forgery. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, please like the video, and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much.